Good day and welcome to this week's ENCA.com live debate. Fear not, our signal has been jammed. We did have a bit of a glitch in getting on stream, but we look very much forward to having this conversation with our online audience. I'm Trudi Makhaya. Thank you for joining us. Today we look not at the state of the nation, but at the state of the opposition. Last week, we saw the president deliver the State of the Nation and various political parties, the EFF, UPM, and the DA, walking out of that session. Now, they did so for various reasons, and we're not here to debate those reasons. I'm sure there's going to be investigations, inquiries, deliberations to unravel, to understand what actually went down. What we're asking today is simply this: is the opposition delivering to its voters what they expect? Are they distracted by spectacle, or are they actually on the right track in terms of their performance in Parliament? I'm joined by various guests to discuss this issue. Next to me in studio, I have Marie Harris. She's a director at Ipsos, the company that does a lot of polling and surveys to gauge public opinion on various matters. We also have Liz Mulomo, who is an independent analyst, a public policy analyst who looks at impact, monitoring, and evaluation of public policies. We'll also have Jordan Hill-Lewis joining us. He's the parliamentary counsel to Musi Maimane of the DA. We're hoping to have the EFF, but I think we had some crossed lines and they were not able to join us at this time. Of course, they're very busy with everything that's happening. Maybe let's just start by setting the scene, just to understand. When we look at the state of the nation, as it were, I want to ask Marie, what are the main concerned about as this parliamentary session kicks off?
Trudy, what we did was to ask people at the end of last year which issues are important to them that they would like government or parliament to address in this new sitting. What happened is that we interviewed 3,608 people all over the country with probability samples, and the results of this is representative of South Africans. So I think we must just say that up front and then take that as the departure point. People mentioned a lot of things. 46 different issues were mentioned, but it was very interesting when we coded that afterwards, that there were 10 issues that stood out. The others were all mentioned by less than 2% of the people. Then, after this particular question, which I will share the results with you just now, we asked them now, of all these things that you have just mentioned, which one is the most important? So everybody could mention whatever they wanted, and then they had to choose one. When we go back to the first question, in mentioning all the issues that are important, as I said to you, there were 10 issues that stood out. The top of that was unemployment. 87% of South Africans mentioned unemployment as one of the issues that they want government to address, and address quite urgently. Then there were a group of issues between the 50 and the 60% were mentioned: poverty, crime, and corruption. Then the next group were around about 40% development, industrial development, infrastructure development, and education. Then health and HIV/AIDS were mentioned by about 30% of people, just under 30% of people. The question of land, landlessness, and land reform was mentioned by 18%. So that's important to 1 out of every 5 South Africans. And then the issue of the brain drain was mentioned by 11%. These issues that I've just mentioned are the 10 most important things for South Africans that they want the government to address. Then if we look at, now they only have one issue, the issue of unemployment is really the most important. 47%, almost half, mentioned this issue. And all the others were much lower on the list, mentioned by about 12, 11%. An issue like health and HIV/AIDS was chosen as the first and most important issue by only 2% of people. The issue of land and landlessness was not chosen as the most important issue. Although it is important, as I said, to 1 out of every 5, when people have to choose their most important issues, they do not mention it. So altogether, I think the big finding out of this is that unemployment is the core and the root problem that South Africans want the government to address. But also, I think we need to keep in mind that these issues are interlinked. Crime is obviously linked to unemployment. Poverty is obviously linked to unemployment. Education is person to get a job. So I do not believe that we should see these things in isolation.
Okay, so not to see these things in isolation. But Liz, coming to you, just looking at what happened in Parliament, I think both as an analyst and also as a citizen, I mean, what did you think of the way a crucial policy statement was, in some ways, without being judgmental, interrupted?
It was disappointing, to put it mildly. The EFF is known now for its antics in disrupting Parliament. However, I think there's a difference between disrupting the presidential parliamentary question and answer time, and there's a difference between interrupting the State of the Nation address. The State of the Nation address is an incredibly important policy statement that the President makes. It sets the tone for the administration for the year. It sets the tone for the allocation of public funds. It sets the tone for the policy-making framework for the year. And in the disruption that the EFF took part in, I sat back and I wondered to what end? What did they actually set out to achieve by that disruption, and did they achieve it? And if you had to do, in economic speak, a cost-benefit analysis, the cost of what they did in terms of the disruption and the subsequent fallout that happened versus the benefit, was it worth it? Given the importance of what the State of the Nation is to the nation in terms of setting the agenda for the year.
Okay, so was it, did it yield any benefits? I think that's a very important question that you're raising there. I mean, looking at our Twitter timeline, we had someone called Maynard Manyoa, who said personality cults are sinking South African politics. Voters are following personalities over ideals. And I want to get back to Mary on this. I mean, how are the personalities doing in terms of their favorability and opinions?
Leaders are extremely important, and people have to feel that they can look up to their leaders. If we all just step back in history and we look at Nelson Mandela and the leadership that he sort of used, it was very clear from the beginning when he started measuring his the feelings of all South Africans about him, that he was in a category of his own. Even at the time when, just before his death, he was still measuring 9 out of 10 from all South Africans. So I think those are very, very big shoes to fill. Nobody can get close to that. But still, I believe that the leader should be at least as popular as his party or her party, and not detract from the party. Because what we find is that if the leader is not seen in a very good light, it actually diminishes the party also in the eyes of the public. We can talk about, if you want to, about the figures that we have for leadership. You want me to?
I do, especially, I mean, obviously President Zuma, but also the main opposition party.
What we do is to ask questions on 2 levels. We first ask people to give a leader and a wide variety of leaders a point out of 10. And that is from all South Africans, not only their party supporters. On a question such as that, President Zuma gets usually between 5 and 6 out of 10. The opposition party leaders usually get between 3 and 4 out of 10. We see that in the last measurement we took is that Trevor Manuel got the highest measurement out of 10. He was followed by President Zuma, which had a 5.6. We also asked another question about leadership, and that is how well this person does their job. because I think it's very important if you look at the president, the deputy president, the national government, how well you do your job is very important. And we have seen in the last measurement that 51%, so just about half of South Africans, say that President Zuma is doing his job very or pretty well. This is a little bit worrying because after the 2009 election, that same question yielded 77%. So 26 percentage points less than what it was in 2009 are saying that President Zuma is doing his job very or pretty well. Obviously, there's a big relationship between what the people of the own party think and what opposition parties think. Opposition parties do not rate, and supporters of opposition parties do not rate President Zuma very highly. His own party give him a point of 69%. And of those, that 69, 23% of those are saying that he's doing his job very well. So I think in my evaluation, looking at previous results we had, I think that is slightly low. It should be higher if you are the president and you are being evaluated by the people in your own party.
That is very true. But it's also interesting that the opposition rate, in as much as he's coming down, the opposition leaders are still fairly mediocre in their rating.
Yes, the opposition parties are obviously fairly mediocre, as I said to you, between 3 and 4. However, if you look at their ratings by their own party, it goes up to a 7 or an 8 out of 10. So the supporters of the DA think a lot of Nelson Mandela. The supporters of the EFF have a lot of support for Julius Malema. But then if we look at our situation where we have one party that has 62% of the vote, obviously if we then look at all South Africans, that influence of the biggest party in parliament has a big influence on all the results. It's like a halo effect almost.
Now, I mean, hearing what Mary has just described in terms of where opposition parties are ranking versus the president, even though he's not doing so well as he used to. Liz, do you get a sense that what transpired or what is transpiring in this parliamentary session as it kicks off, is it going to do the opposition leaders any favors? Is it going to enhance their stature or not?
I don't think so, and I think all parties involved lost on the day. What the opposition parties I think miss is critically the fact that there's a huge policy vacuum in South Africa. And interestingly, when the EFF entered the political fray, they entered on the ticket of the battle for ideas. And what they wanted to do was put on the table a different way of looking at how we approach development in South Africa on the ticket of economic freedom. And they brought in a lot of different angles almost to the same themes that the ANC tackles, but the different angles to issues of land and education and state capacity, etc. And when they entered the fray, it was on the battle of ideas. From the time that we voted a year ago to now, we've heard very little from the EFF about those ideas. And in engaging with the State of the Nation address afterwards in the debates that follow, that would be the perfect platform for them to put their ideas forward. And I think that's an opportunity that they've lost. I think it's an opportunity that the nation has lost. Hear these ideas, not just from the EFF, but from all political parties. And I think what the State of the Nation address does is it sets the baseline to say, well, these are the ideas that we, the ANC, the governing party, have. And the debates thereafter give us the opportunity to engage with those ideas, because that's what politics is at the end of the day. It's about ideas that get translated into politics. And I think we missed it there. And that's why I say everybody lost on the day.
So you say everybody lost on the day. Jordan, I want to come to you on this as somebody who is obviously parliamentary counsel to the DA, someone who is very close to these issues. You know, we've heard Liz and also Mary talking about the way people view Parliament and also the way political parties sell themselves on the basis of their ideas. And yet there seems to be now a vacuum in that now, you know, we're seeing, you know, men and women in black walking in and out of Parliament. It's all about the gesture. Are the ideas suffering in all of this contestation?
debate about the real issues facing the country. I'd agree because part agree that it's at the moment it's very Parliament, the presidency, very difficult to have it in government so beset by crisis and that really is consuming all of our focus at the moment. What we should be talking and in a way about which is the economy and which the unemployment crisis in this. Ironically, it's almost helping the government country. So there's a crisis around President Jacob, very little real work and by other opposition parties who are using every parliamentary sitting to his personal time to. So I do think we are playing it our self giving them in a way a free pass on what we should be talking about, which is really jobs and the economy.
Okay, jobs and employment. Jordan, I'm going to cut you there because I think we're having a bit of an issue with your connection. But I think you said something quite important. Jobs, employment, as Mary had said at the beginning, that's like what 1 out of 10 South Africans are concerned about, the real issues. And in a way, we're not dealing with that because there's this issue. So, I mean, Liz, maybe coming to you, is there a risk that opposition is also becoming a single issue opposition? Because all we're hearing about is Uganda. From your perspective, do you see the opposition taking a firm stand on unemployment, for instance?
Not at all. I don't see the opposition parties taking a firm stand on anything other than anti-ANC rhetoric. And that's what a lot of what we get from the opposition parties is about. What would be an absolute pleasure is if we had opposition parties who could actually focus on not just anti-ANC, because that is important and it does have its place, but what are your ideas? What is the DA's position on education and health and unemployment? What is the EFF's position on those matters? And not just single paragraphs on their website or 2 or 3 tweets on Twitter. When I mentioned earlier the fact that there's a policy vacuum, it's a massive policy vacuum. And I think that vacuum exists because the ideas don't exist. I think a lot of the opposition parties focus too much on the ANC and what the ANC is not doing right and what the ANC is not doing, rather than on, if we were in government, this is what we would do, these are the ideas, this is how we would do it. So there is definitely an absence of ideas in terms of from the different opposition parties. And the State of the Nation is incidentally a great platform for them to come in and present their ideas.
So not capitalizing on an important opportunity. We've got 2 people on the Hangout. We've got Eleanor and Thembinkosi. Maybe coming to you, Thembinkosi. I mean, how is this all sitting with you as a citizen, as someone who thinks about these issues? What's your thoughts on this? Okay, I think we seem to be having a problem with Thembinkosi. Jordan, can I come back to you? This has been quite a serious proposition that's been put forward, that the opposition is absent on the. What do you say to that? Why are some people, some analysts not seeing, those policy positions that should be the lifeblood of opposition?
Well, let me of independent constitutional institutions is not just anti-ANC rhetoric. This is not political point scoring. We need to understand that this is a fundamental assault on the constitutional institutions of our democracy. And as opposition parties, we have a responsibility to defend those. So when we see the abuses that we're currently seeing, we have to insist that those abuses cannot succeed. We have to hold the president and the executive accountable. Otherwise, we would be remiss in our job. That's not just anti-ANC rhetoric. Then on the point of policy, I would this is something that one hears often, but if one visits the DA's website, you will find a comprehensive suite of economic policies, many of which run to dozens, if not more than 100 pages, with serious detail, going down to an alternative budget that completely costs all of the DA's proposals for government. So this idea that there's a lack of detail is simply not true. What is true is that it's really, really difficult to get journalists to report on that detail, because journalists like to report on fights. They like to report on scandal and on headlines. But the detail is very definitely there, and I would encourage any listener to go to the DA website, da.org.za, and to check out some of our policies, because they actually are very comprehensive and very impressive.
Okay, I think, Mary, I want to come back to you on that. The fact around, for instance, the media not playing its part possibly, and reporting on the spectacle and the fight. When you talk to people and you do your surveys, do you find that people are interested in substance? Because, almost we're putting it somehow on the parties themselves, and yet it could be that the media is simply delivering what people want to talk about, and perhaps people are not engaging in policy.
I agree with Jordan that it's much easier to report on fights and interesting snippets like that than on the real policy issues. And perhaps I think there's definitely a lack of journalism in some instances, where people do not go to the substance of what's being talked about. But I also want to say something that Liz said earlier, that there's an absence of ideas and an absence of policy. I think that absence of ideas and policy is not only amongst the opposition parties, but also in government. The government is, or the ANC is such a huge player in this whole question of governing the country, that they control all the committees, they control all the legislation that goes out. They do not have to listen to anybody else. And therefore, I think it's sometimes very difficult for opposition parties to make themselves heard. And yes, it is probably 6 of the one and half a dozen of the other, but I don't think that either the journalists or the political parties do necessarily enough, and I include the ANC in there, to propagate their policies. If we talk to people about politics, it's very interesting. Only 1 in 5 is at all interested in politics. And I think that is quite worrying. In a country with all the diversity that we have, in a country with our history, in a country with our possibilities, that only 1 in 5 people say they're interested in politics. So I really think that that's a problem that we have to address, but also at the school level, because school children are not taught why it is important to vote. They are not even taught what the process is for voting. They are not taught why we have different political parties in this country. They don't have a clue about those things that are citizen responsibilities in a way. And perhaps there's a gap. There's definitely a gap there, because if we bring people up to say that government is something that happens over there in Cape Town, obviously there's going to be very, very little interest.
I mean, we were having this debate yesterday, even on our Twitter feed, as to, people saying the opposition is about action, and people love seeing action, and we're like, are we risking dumbing it all down in the focus of action? And by that, I also mean people who are reporting on this. Liz, you wanted to come back on some of the points that Jordan had made about the way the opposition engages with the ANC.
Yes, what I wanted to do was just to agree with what he was saying about the depth of the DA policy position, and it's true. All their policy documents, very well researched, detailed documents, are freely available on their website. So I perhaps should have prefaced my comments with that. The other political party, incidentally, that has done some work along the lines of policy and coming up with ideas is COPE. With the other political parties, not so much. So I just wanted to agree with him in that regard. The other comment that I wanted to make was, if you listen to the budget speech that's made every year, it's a direct reflection of the State of the Nation address. The biggest policy statement that any government can make, they make in their budgets. because that tells us what this government is committed to. It's almost like putting your money where your mouth is. So the commitments to policies and programs is actually made in the budget speech, and that's the biggest policy statement that any government can make. What the State of the Nation address does is it sets the tone for that budget. So we hear our president and he's telling us that this is where, I think in this address there was a 9-point plan or a 10-point plan, and that tells us immediately that this is where our money is going to be spent in the coming year. What a crucial statement to make. And so for a political party to disrupt that, I think is suboptimal. And it goes back to what I had said initially, where we as the nation then lose out on the opportunity to debate on such an important matter.
Okay. So we lose out on a
agree.
very important matter. Jordan, you agree? Go ahead.
I don't think it was right at all to disrupt the State of the Nation. That's why we took the principal position to uphold the rules of Parliament and to make sure that the State of the Nation could proceed, because we felt there were very important issues that the country needed to hear about. But what was absolutely unacceptable was the incursion of armed policemen inside the House of Parliament and the very savage violence which they dished out to elected members of Parliament. And we could not sit there after that and pretend as if everything was business as usual and that nothing fundamentally problematic to our democracy had just happened right in front of our eyes. And so when the Speaker refused to confirm or deny whether those were police officers or not, but before that order to try and get the business of House back to normality and to try and let SONA proceed as normal so that we could hear and debate and discuss the issues of the day. Let me just say one other point about the budget. I absolutely agree that the government's greatest test is not SONA, it's actually coming next week at the budget. And we really, I think all South Africans will be very anxious to hear what kind of budget the Minister of Finance presents, because if we do not show international markets that we can get this economy and our budget under control and plug the deficits, then it will mean some very, very bad things for our economy and for our currency.
Okay, so the budget, of course, as both of you, Jordan and Liz, are saying, is very important in the sense of giving actually real resources to what is being talked about. We had another comment on our Twitter from someone who was very a lovely Twitter handle called True Elegance, and she said, so we asked, is the opposition distracted or on the issues on point? And they said, I would say distracted. They will keep walking out instead of fighting the issue if they don't get their way. So it seems that there's this idea that actually it's not about the actual debate, it's about people getting their way. But I think perhaps this, could be just a way of seeing it in black and white, to say either you fighting the issues or you're creating spectacle. I mean, are we caught up in perhaps a false duality in this? Perhaps you should be doing both, massive spectacle and massive engagement on issues. Jordan, what's your thought on that? Is there space to do both?
We're dealing with the issues. I think the job of the opposition in South Africa is to defend the Constitution and defend the institutions of democracy against the abuses that they are currently suffering at the hands of this president and this government. And so when we see those abuses, we cannot just remain quiet and say, well,
okay, we've lost Jordan.
Let's debate the issues. We have to call out those, push them with everything we've got, whether that be.
Okay, we've lost Jordan again. We'll come back to you on that. Just hold on to that about, the role of an opposition in this environment. Liz, I want to come to you, and perhaps maybe this is a slightly personal, not entirely personal, but one that draws on personal experience. When you look at the opposition as a woman, right, and I don't want to essentialize people, but as a woman, is it, Jordan just talked about the violence and some of the rough engagement that you see. Do we risk just turning women off politics? I mean, is anyone really going to go to parliament after witnessing those, really tough encounters? Are we creating a very macho political culture?
It was frightening to look at the way people were huddled off out of Parliament last week. It was truly frightening. And putting myself as a woman in that position, I don't know how I would have responded to being manhandled in that way. But that's my personal view. It's a travesty that had to happen, regardless of gender, male or female. But I think it looked particularly bad to see ladies, women being manhandled in that manner. It should never happen in Parliament. And I just wanted to touch on what Jordan had been speaking about earlier, in terms of the what you had spoken about spectacle versus the issues. I'm conflicted about this because I tweeted a while ago that the one thing that I appreciate, for example, the EFF, is that they've woken a lot of us up from our slumber. A lot of things we were not aware of in terms of how Parliament works, are politicians answering and accountable in Parliament. So because of all the drama and the histrionics and the spectacle, I personally have learned a lot about the mechanics of our country, and I appreciate that. I do think, however, that there is a time and a place for spectacle, and there isn't. And I don't think that the State of the Nation address was a time or a place for the spectacle.
Okay. I'm going to put the same question to you. Are we creating a politics for men?
I think politics in this country is unfortunately driven by men. And it's part of the fact that the leader of the opposition is a woman. It's a tough place to be in. I think also after having seen the violence in Parliament last week, it really can be a very, very scary place. But then I want to link it immediately to the position of women in society. If we, for instance, ask on surveys whether it's more important for a boy to get an education than a girl, quite a number of South Africans agree with that, which is totally beyond my comprehension. And then also, if we ask people whether they think men make better political leaders than women do, 36% of South Africans agree with that. So I think we still have a very, very, very long way to go on the road to equality, where we look at people as people and not necessarily, she's a woman, she can't do this. And see people for just what they are and their abilities, and not necessarily only their gender. So that's a point that's very important to me. And then secondly, something that Liz said earlier about people, the Parliament, the institution of Parliament suffered. I do think it definitely did suffer last week, but it's up to probably the most up to the ANC and the government to restore the dignity of Parliament, and also up to the opposition parties to come to the party and restore the credibility of Parliament. If South Africans look at Parliament, the place where the laws are made, where that defines how we live in this country, as a place that you can't take seriously, where there's a lot of violence and uproar and nothing good comes out of it, I think it will be a very bad day.
A very bad day indeed. I'm going to ask you guys to now wrap up. Just looking forward to this parliamentary session. And also, of course, looking towards 2016, where there are upcoming local government elections. What are the prospects of the opposition? Are they going to do well, or do they risk being sidelined? Liz, I'll start with you. Your final thoughts?
I don't know. I think I think they lose on one hand and they gain on the other hand. And what the net effect of that is at the ballot box only time will tell. In terms of the prospects of the opposition going forward, I hope that they go back, sit down, look at the distraction that they caused at the State of the Nation address from the EFF side, and then from the DA side, the walkout. And as I would say to my daughter, with everything that you do, why did you do that? And what did you achieve? Was it worth it? And I hope that all the political parties go back to ground, back to basics, ask themselves those questions, and that the answers guide them going forward. I don't think anything was achieved at the State of the Nation address this year.
Thanks, Liz. And so she says perhaps nothing was achieved.
I think 2016 is going to be one of the most interesting elections that we have ever seen in this country. I do think, all in all, the opposition might do better than what they did in the national election last year, especially in some areas. And that is not necessarily a function of how good the opposition is. It might be a function of how bad the government is doing, and of whether the government is keeping to their word. What I do think political parties should do is to stick to their principles. And, you don't need to agree with somebody, but if the message coming from them is consistent and you can trust them, that's fine. But if the message is one thing the one day and another thing the next day, you cannot trust them. And I think that is part of the role of politicians in this country, to restore trust in parliament and in politics, so that we don't have only 1 in 5 people who say they're interested in politics.
Thanks, Marie. And we shall leave it at that. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.